So I'm Josh, and I'm a first year ESRM student at UW.
I'm Eva. I'm also a first year ESRM student at UW.
And I'm Courtney Bobsin. I am a research scientist at the Olympic Natural Resources Center that's housed within the School of Environmental and Forest Sciences at UW. And I'm also a PhD candidate in the School of Environmental and Forest Sciences.
Okay, awesome. So to start off, could you sort of just give us a quick rundown of your career and sort of why you chose it, and then also just a brief synthesis of the work you're doing at the ONRC?
Sure, yeah. So maybe I can start a little bit a few years ago. I did my undergrad degree in environmental science and biology at St. Louis University in Missouri. And I really enjoyed my time and my education. And I also left feeling a little bit uncertain about what kind of career I might have with that degree and what skills I really had to do some kind of job. So I ended up taking a position in Southeast Alaska and worked for a conservation nonprofit. And through that process, learned a lot about the Tongass National Forest, about community engagement and working with local people who have a big stake in what happens on public lands. And after leaving there and moving to Seattle, I started my master's program in 2015 at UW and ended up continuing on afterwards in my PhD program and eventually became a research scientist with ONRC. I work broadly in the forest ecology and management world. I do a lot around adaptive management and long-term research studies. ONRC is situated on the Olympic Peninsula. It's based in Forks, Washington, so all the way on the west side of the peninsula. It's a pretty rural and quite a remote area on that side of the peninsula. We work at ONRC on a mixture of both aquatic and forest-based projects, and I am totally on the forest side of things. So I don't do much in the aquatic world. And a lot of my research at ONRC is focused on long-term research studies. I have a couple going right now. There's a long-term ecosystem productivity study that was started in the 90s that we work on. I, for my dissertation, have started an ethnoforestry pilot study that's about 5 acres or so. And then we also work on a much, much larger scale, 20,000 acre operational scale study in partnership with Washington Department of Natural Resources. So they all kind of broadly touch on forest ecology and management and address different research questions and needs and things of that nature.
Why did you choose your career path? Like, what were your motivations for wanting to be in forestry?
Yeah, when I was living in Southeast Alaska, it was a good opportunity to see the ways in which people interact with their landscape, especially in the world of forestry. Like they, in a lot of rural places, not specific necessarily to that part of Alaska, even on the peninsula, people are often dependent upon the ways in which we manage natural resources. And I think it was really evident living there how interconnected people are to their place. And that was really fascinating and inspiring to me. So I felt like it would benefit me to go into graduate school and pursue this further and gain some more skills in this world and focus more on the science behind management and forest ecology and how those decisions impact people.
So so then looking forward, what do you envision for your field in the future?
I envision our field to be more transdisciplinary in the future. I think we're really seeing a shift recently in the ways in which people are collaborating, managers and researchers collaborating, which sounds intuitive, but has not been done at any kind of large scale. Collaborations between community members and scientists and folks who study soils and trees and understory and social science and anthropology and kind of everything in between. So I would love to see more collaboration and more transdisciplinary approaches to management in the future, and a greater emphasis on inclusion and equity going forward. Like, I think that we're kind of at this turning point in the forestry world. We're seeing a lot more young people engaged in forest ecology and forestry in itself. And it would be great to see in the future that continue. And I would particularly love to see new perspectives, like people from diverse backgrounds bring new perspectives that help the field. And it would be great to continue to build a space where people feel like it's a place, it's a field in which they'd want to pursue.
What does the land use study mean to you?
Can you repeat that question? You were a little muffled.
What does the land use study mean to you?
The land I study, it means a great deal to me. I find it very unique. The outer coast gets well over 100 inches of rain a year. So it's a temperate rainforest. It's dripping with moss. It's vibrantly green. It has this like fascination to me for a lot of reasons. It's important to me, although I've only been on the West Coast for about the last 10 years, and I know it means quite a bit to the people that we work with, for sure. A lot of my time recently has been spent connecting with community members, with stakeholders, with tribal members, and trying to get a sense of what these spaces mean to them. And it's really powerful, the reaction that I always get, that like people are very interconnected with their landscape. And I feel that as well. I spend a lot of time like hiking, data collecting, foraging, just being in the spaces, and it's a place that feels really comfortable.
How has your work with Indigenous and community members influenced that definition?
Oh, of disturbance?
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. Okay. That's a great question. I would consider a disturbance some alteration to the landscape. It can vary on spatial scale and temporal scale in instances. A disturbance example on the peninsula, and a key one at that, would be wind. We see large windstorms blowing down trees, sometimes on like a stand level, like quite a bit of trees are blowing down. Other times it's less than that, but I think wind is our primary disturbance agent. You might think of wildfires on the east side of the state being one of their key disturbances. In terms of the ways in which I've thought about disturbance based on communities, that's such a good question. I think that I don't know that it's directly changed the way I've thought about disturbances, but their perspectives have definitely thought about the way I've considered management, and management can certainly be considered as a disturbance. Like a clear cut, for example, is certainly considered a disturbance. Engaging with local people to understand their perceptions of that disturbance has certainly changed the way I think about it. Like a lot of people, especially folks who are not, say, like living in urban areas and are not really engaged in forestry very often, think of a clear cut as a devastation. And people on the coast might see it as an opportunity to provide habitat for elk and deer and other wildlife. And they see that as a good thing in some instances. So that like has really reframed the way I think about some actions, for sure.
And sort of on the flip side, then, how would you define a healthy state of the land use study?
Mhm. I think of a healthy forest or healthy state of the forest
Mhm.
as being healthy in multiple ways. So I think that I would consider a healthy forest having um, environmental health and also social health, like promoting both values, environmental and social.
Mhm.
So you could think of understory biodiversity or productive soils or tree health as environmental factors in a healthy forest. And I think additionally, I think of the social needs of a forest, like people, especially in rural areas, rely on forests for their livelihoods in one way or another, and certainly use it for other personal or cultural values. So I think on the peninsula, but certainly not only on the peninsula, a healthy forest would also be one that has understory for wildlife to browse on, for people to pick berries and to harvest um, different plant materials, to have material for non-timber forest products, things like chanterelle mushrooms are picked and are a huge part of the economy on the peninsula. And that to me would be, a factor in a healthy forest. So thinking about not only our kind of typical environmental factors, but also social ones.
And so, or it's really interesting hearing sort of how sometimes, or like land management clashes a lot um, with community values of the people that live on the land. And so moving forward, I'm curious what you see the relationship evolving of researchers and managers with the land, while um, or creating a or listening while giving a greater voice to these their community values. Sorry, that was worded kind of earlier. So how moving forward, how do you see the balance shifting between these two sets of values, and where would you sort of want that to go?
Mm. Yeah, it's been really fascinating throughout the last 2 years working on this large experiment. I've worked with a lot of managers through this process and a lot of community members. And I I see a lot of collaboration between the two groups. Like I hear from managers their interest in trying to manage for other social values. Like they're also not naive to it, that like they also, are people who recreate and maybe pick berries and also use the forest in multiple ways. So I think I've I've felt really positive recently about this kind of relationship between the two groups. And I can't really speak to it in other areas because I don't work super closely with managers in other parts of our state. But on the peninsula, especially on the west side of the peninsula, it's been really refreshing to see this um, interest in managers to want to work with local people. Like there are lots of folks in Forks, lots of managers who are like giving field tours and meeting with community members. Like there's actually maybe more engagement than I had initially thought. And I think more of that continuing into the future would be really valuable. Knowing that like there's always constraints to everything. Like there's as much as managers may want to include social values or social interests in their management, like there's also other factors in the way in which they need to manage. So yeah, trying to promote that in the future would be great.
And then how do Indigenous voices fit into that equation as well?
Yeah, so I would say that for many of the tribes, certainly some of the ones that I work with, their respective departments of natural resources within the tribes
Mhm.
often work with Washington DNR on for a number of reasons, like for permits, for road access for their tribal members, for cedar bark harvesting. So for a number of like more logistical but also cultural pieces, there's already a collaboration that happens. I certainly can't speak to how successful or unsuccessful that is for any given tribe. You know, it's not my place to comment on that, but I've heard from both sides the interest in collaborating. I've heard a lot from DNR, like how interested they are in continuing those kinds of collaborations, which is like really positive to me to maintain that. And I think that I imagine it's only going to improve going forward. I think that in the last several years, there's been more of a social push to center Indigenous voices and perspectives in the narrative, in like kind of the public discourse. And I think that I mean, I hope it also continues, but I think that also that's hopefully enlightened other managers to think about the ways in which they can, you know, do future collaborations.
What do you perceive as the biggest threat to the land use study?
Sorry, the biggest stress?
Like threat to
Threat.
the land use study.
Gotcha. I think, which, you know, is not unique to the peninsula, but I think climate change is, of course, going to be such an issue going forward. I think we're certainly feeling the effects now. And I think the odds are unfortunately looking like it's going to be exacerbated in the future. We've already seen like really extreme temperatures and big storm events. Like last June 2021, we had the heat dome that was all over the Pacific Northwest, including on the peninsula. Forks got to be well over 100 degrees, which is like mind-boggling for a community that if it's 80 degrees in Forks, that's like quite a warm summer day. And experiencing temperatures well over 20 degrees Fahrenheit above that is really alarming for a number of reasons. It fried a lot of the new growth of our trees. I think that there's going to be, I'm sure, some more investigations on the impact of that. And I'm sure that's not the last time we'll have something like that heat dome happen. So I think that that's, of course, going to be a threat going forward. The peninsula is on a pretty long fire interval because it's such a wet place. It takes a lot for it to like dry out enough to have the right combinations of factors to be, you know, having stretches of really warm days to dry out the forest and something that ignites it. But if we have more summer days that are consistently warmer, fire is not out of the realm of possibility. And I think that could become a threat going forward. Not that the peninsula never has it. There's certainly fire on the peninsula and there always has been, but yeah, I would be curious to see how that unfolds over the next several decades.
And so what management practices do you think would best address the threat of climate change going forward?
I think that novel approaches to management and to research is going to be really critical. Like, we don't really know what the future is going to hold. And I think the best thing that we can do is work on adaptive management style studies to test out different approaches. Like, I think if we only limit ourselves to what's been done before, it will be really, really limiting of what our options are in the future. So if we think creatively and like center innovation in how we approach forest management, I think it will pay great dividends in the future. I think that's a lot of what we do at ONRC, is trying to, especially through this large study, think about new ways to approach management. And I think that going forward, especially in light of climate change, trying out new prescriptions now will be incredibly helpful, knowing that forest grow slowly, and seeing change in studies takes, a fair amount of time compared to, say, something that is growing in a lab. So starting the process of thinking creatively and innovatively to put forward studies that can address questions into the future, I think will be really valuable.
How does eco grief manifest in your work?
I think I feel a lot of eco grief around other regions. Like I feel a lot of fear around increased magnitudes of fire, especially on the West Coast, not just in Washington, but throughout California, all the way up to Washington and into British Columbia. I think I feel a lot of grief because it's, horrible in a lot of ways. It's like can devastate communities. It disproportionately affects people who are lower income, people of color. It really exacerbates a lot of problems. I think on the peninsula, I feel a lot of hope. I think that working with local communities and spending a lot of time with folks there have made me feel like people are really adaptive and resilient. And I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of changes that will throw curveballs, but I think for now, I actually feel quite hopeful in their interest and capacity to adapt to changes.
So I guess you kind of answered this next question, but like, how do you, as a researcher, sort of cope with the eco grief as a result of everything that's changing around us?
I think as a scientist, I like really just want to study it. Like I think that maybe a solution in some part would be to put forth an action where we can understand how to change things going forward. I think like an actionable solution always makes me feel better in light of this kind of long-term fear of climate change, and the ways in which it's going to manifest itself is really scary, and it's hard to pinpoint in a lot of ways. And so I think also being trained as a scientist makes me want to lean into that process to try to come up with some solutions.